The air in the maintenance bay was thick with the scent of machine oil and recycled oxygen, a familiar blend that Kalen had long since grown accustomed to. Outside the grimy viewport of his workshop, the asteroid belt's perpetual twilight cast long shadows across Series 7, the mining outpost he'd called home for the past 7 years. The station itself was a patchwork of mismatched modules, added haphazardly as the mining operation expanded, much like the population that inhabited it, diverse, functional, but never quite fitting together seamlessly. Kalen hunched over his workbench, a pair of micro-optics fixed to his face as he carefully manipulated the innards of an ancient navigation device. His fingers, calloused but precise, gently realigned a crystal matrix while a soft blue light emitted from the tool in his other hand. People brought him the impossible, broken relics, outdated tech, machines deemed irreparable, and somehow he breathed life back into them. It was a talent that had earned him respect on a station where respect was as scarce as fresh air. The workshop itself reflected its owner, orderly but isolated, tucked away in the least desirable segment of the station where the artificial gravity occasionally fluctuated and the climate control was temperamental at best. Tools lined the walls in meticulous arrangements, parts were cataloged in transparent bins, and a small living space was sectioned off in the back. Just enough room for a cot, a compact food prep unit, and a few personal items sealed away in a storage crate he rarely opened. He preferred it this way. Minimal interactions, no entanglements. The miners, traders, and station personnel who brought him work understood the unspoken rules. Leave the item, state the problem, pay the fee, and go. Some tried small talk, but Kalen's terse responses and unwavering focus on his work soon discouraged them. The few who knew him longer knew better than to ask about his past, about the prestigious engineering career he'd abandoned, or about the haunted look that occasionally passed across his face when certain topics arose. The silence of his workshop was interrupted by the heavy thud of expensive magnetic boots on the metal floor outside. Kalen didn't look up, even as the door slid open without the courtesy of a request for entry. Only one person on the station was that presumptuous. Master Engineer Kalen. The booming voice filled the cramped space. Still buried in your toys, I see. Zor Hesh filled the doorway, his massive frame barely contained by a tailored environmental suit that displayed his wealth in its gold-trimmed seams and custom fittings. Behind him stood 2 security guards, their hands resting casually on pulse weapons, expressions impassive beneath tactical visors. Kalen carefully set down his tools before removing his micro-optics. Your atmospheric regulator is ready, he said flatly, reaching for a sealed container on a shelf. The filtration system needed recalibration, not replacement. Saved you about 10,000 credits over ordering a new one. Zor Hesh laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Always the pragmatist. That's why I like you, Kalen. No nonsense, just results. He snapped his fingers, and one of the guards stepped forward to collect the container. Payment was processed in advance, Kalen said, turning back to his bench, a clear dismissal. Yes, Zur waved a hand dismissively. But I've come with something else today. A token of my appreciation. The mining magnate gestured, and the second guard stepped aside, revealing a third figure that had been standing silently behind them. A slender humanoid with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly in the harsh workshop lighting. It's her. Form was undeniably female, with an elegant bone structure and large, almond-shaped eyes that reflected light like polished silver. But what drew Kalen's attention was the metal collar fitted tightly around her neck, embedded with blinking control nodes. A Xylosion, Zor announced proudly, as if unveiling a rare collectible. From the latest acquisition in the Outer Rim. Their colony world put up quite a fight, I'm told, but eventually, well, business is business. The alien stood perfectly still, eyes downcast, hands clasped before her. She wore a simple gray jumpsuit with Zor's corporate emblem stamped on the shoulder. They're known for their technical aptitude and absolute loyalty once properly conditioned, Zor continued. This one, Lyra, has been specifically programmed for engineering assistance. I thought she might be useful to you, considering your solitary nature. Kalen stared at the alien, then at Zor, his expression hardening. I don't want a slave. A murmur of surprise came from one of the guards. Zor's smile faltered momentarily before returning, strained. Don't be absurd, Kalen. She's not a slave. She's an indentured asset. Perfectly legal in this sector. Zor's voice took on a patronizing tone, and quite valuable. Most men would be thanking me profusely right now. Kalen set his jaw. I said no. The mining magnate's eyes narrowed. Are you refusing my gift? I'm refusing to own a sentient being. A tense silence filled the workshop. Outside, the distant sound of a docking bay alarm wailed briefly before being silenced. Zor gave a short, humorless laugh. Your principles are quaint, Kalen, especially for someone hiding at the edge of civilized space. He studied the engineer's face for a moment, then shrugged elaborately. Fine. Consider her on extended loan, then. A technical assistant. Use her skills. Don't use her skills. That's your affair. He turned to leave, then paused. But she stays. I've registered her presence in your workshop with station security. Anywhere else, and the collar activates. He tapped his wrist console meaningfully. I don't waste assets, Kalen. Remember that. With a gesture to his guards, Zur exited, the door sliding shut behind them with a finality that seemed to echo in Kalen's mind, leaving him alone with Lyra. The alien stood exactly where she had been placed, not having moved a muscle during the entire exchange. Her breathing was so shallow it was barely perceptible. In the sudden quiet of the workshop, Kalen could hear the faint electronic hum of the collar at her neck. I'm not your master, he said finally, his voice rough. Lyra's silver eyes flicked up briefly, then down again. She made no other response. Kalen ran a hand through his unkempt hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. Look, you can stand wherever you want. Sit if you're tired. I don't give orders here. The Xylosian remained motionless, a living statue. Her stillness was unnerving. With a sigh of exasperation, Kalen turned back to his workbench, picking up his micro-optics again. The navigation device still needed calibration, and he had 3 other jobs waiting. He didn't have time for Zor's power games. As he worked, he remained acutely aware of the alien's presence. 1 hour passed, then 2. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even shift her weight. It was as if she were powered down, waiting for instructions that would activate her. When Kalen finally finished the navigation device, he stretched, his back cracking audibly. He glanced at Lyra, who stood in exactly the same position. A spike of irrational anger shot through him, at Zor, at the situation, at his own helplessness to change it. There's food in the prep unit, he said curtly, gesturing to the living area. And water. The sanitation facility is through that door. I don't know what you need, but help yourself. He gathered his tools, cleaning them methodically before returning them to their places. When he looked up again, Lyra had turned her head slightly to observe him, though she remained rooted to her spot. Do you understand me? He asked. A single, deliberate nod. Good. He pointed to a clear space near his supply shelves. You can sleep there. I'll find something to use as a bedroll. Another nod. So slight, it was almost imperceptible. Kalen sighed again. I'm going to eat, then sleep. Tomorrow's another day of work. He paused, then added, I'm not going to hurt you, or use you, or whatever it is Zor expects. You're not property. Not to me. Something flickered behind those silver eyes, a momentary calculation, an assessment, but it disappeared so quickly Kalen wondered if he'd imagined it. With nothing more to say, he turned away, settling in for his evening meal of reconstituted protein and synthetic vegetables. Throughout it all, he felt those eyes on him, watching, waiting, evaluating. It was the most uncomfortable meal of his life. That night, as Kalen lay on his cot, the unfamiliar sound of another person's breathing prevented sleep. He stared at the ceiling, wondering what chain of events had led him here, sharing his sanctuary with a slave he didn't want but couldn't free. The collar was beyond his expertise. Tampering with it would likely trigger security protocols, possibly harming Lyra in the process. And where would she go? even if he could remove it. A stateless alien in a human-dominated outpost, where species like hers were viewed as commodities, not people. He turned on his side, watching the dim outline of Lyra lying rigidly on the thin padding he'd found for her. Her eyes were closed, but he doubted she was sleeping. Even in rest, she seemed to be waiting for orders. What had been done to her to create such perfect, terrified compliance? And more importantly, was there still a person under all that conditioning? For the first time in years, Kalen fell asleep thinking of someone other than himself. Morning on Series 7 was an arbitrary designation, marked only by the station's lighting systems transitioning from night cycle blue to a harsh daylight approximation. Kalen rose early, his body stiff from a restless night. To his surprise, Lyra was already up, or perhaps she had never truly slept. She stood by the main workbench, perfectly still except for her eyes, which were carefully cataloging every tool, component, and device in sight. He cleared his throat. She immediately straightened, eyes dropping to the floor. "You don't have to do that," he said, the frustration in his voice poorly masked. "Look wherever you want." Kalen moved to the food prep unit, programming it for a double portion of morning rations. When a unit chimed, he separated the food onto 2 plates and placed one on the edge of a small table. "Eat," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his. Lyra hesitated, then moved with fluid grace to the offered seat. Her movements were economical, precise, nothing wasted, nothing excessive. She waited until Kalen had taken his first bite before touching her own food. The silence stretched between them as they ate. Kalen found himself studying her when she wasn't looking. Up close, he could see that her blue skin had subtle variations in tone, darker around her joints and lightening at her temples. Her hair, pulled back in a tight configuration, was a deep indigo that almost appeared black except where the light caught it. And her hands, they were remarkable, with long, slender fingers that featured an extra joint, offering a range of motion human hands couldn't achieve. Perfect for detailed technical work, he realized. No wonder her species was valued for engineering tasks. "I have clients coming today," he said finally, breaking the silence. "They're not like Zor. They won't expect anything from you. Just stay out of the way, and there shouldn't be any problems." Lyra nodded, her face expressionless. The day progressed with an awkward rhythm. Kalen worked, and Lyra observed. Always from a distance, always silent, always ready to disappear into the background when customers arrived. Those customers, however, invariably noticed her presence, their reactions ranging from raised eyebrows to knowing smirks. "Finally decided you needed some company," commented a grizzled asteroid miner, dropping off a malfunctioning pressure gauge. His eyes lingered on Lyra's form in a way that made Kalen's jaw tighten. "She's a technical consultant," Kalen replied flatly. "The gauge will be ready tomorrow." The miner chuckled. Sure. Technical consultant. That's a new one." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Word of advice. The blue ones need more protein than we do. Keeps their energy up for consulting." Kalen said nothing, his silence eventually driving the miner from the workshop with a final suggestive wink. As the day wore on, similar interactions played out. News traveled fast on a station the size of Series 7, and by midday, it seemed everyone knew that the reclusive Kalen had acquired a Xylosian assistant. Each visitor brought their own assumptions, their own innuendos, their own advice on handling alien property. With each encounter, Kalen grew more terse, his answers shorter, his patience thinner. Throughout it all, Lyra remained a ghost in the background, revealing nothing of what she might be thinking or feeling about being discussed, as if she were an appliance rather than a person. It was late afternoon when Kalen noticed something odd, a small calibration tool that had been malfunctioning for weeks. One he'd been meaning to fix, but hadn't found time for, was now sitting on his workbench, fully disassembled and partly reassembled in a modified configuration. The work was precise, the components arranged in a logical pattern that suggested the process had been interrupted. He looked up, finding Lyra watching him from her corner, her expression giving nothing away. "Did you do this?" he asked, gesturing to the tool. A slight nod. "Why did you stop?" She hesitated, then pointed to the door, then to her eyes, indicating he realized that she had ceased working when customers began arriving. Kalen picked up the half-reassembled tool, examining the modifications. They were elegant, utilizing existing components in a way he hadn't considered, potentially doubling the tool's accuracy. "This is good work," he said, surprise evident in his voice. Something changed in Lyra's posture, a barely perceptible straightening of her shoulders, a slight lifting of her chin. Pride, perhaps, or relief. Kalen rolled the workbench's secondary stool toward her. "Show me what you were planning for the rest." For a moment, she didn't move. Then, with careful steps, she approached, perching on the edge of the stool as if expecting it to be yanked away. Her hands hovered above the components, awaiting final permission. Kalen nodded, and those extraordinary fingers went to work. What followed was a revelation. Lyra didn't simply repair the tool. She transformed it, her movements so fluid they appeared choreographed. She worked without hesitation, without reference materials, with an intuitive understanding of the mechanics that spoke of a profound education and experience. This was no conditioned drone. This was a master technician. When she finished presenting the rebuilt tool for his inspection, Kalen found himself genuinely impressed for the first time in years. He tested it, finding the calibration perfect, the operation smoother than when it was new. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked. Lyra's eyes clouded. Her right hand rose to touch the collar at her neck, then fell away. She looked at him, and for a brief moment, Kalen glimpsed something behind that carefully neutral expression, a world of loss, of memories forbidden but not forgotten. "Never mind," he said quietly. "Thank you." As he turned away, he heard it, so faint he almost missed it, a whisper in a voice unused to speaking. "Welcome." The single word hung in the air between them, transforming the workshop from a place of isolation to something else entirely. Something neither of them had words for yet. The next morning, Kalen woke to find Lyra already at the workbench, methodically organizing components that had been haphazardly jumbled in one of his storage bins. She glanced up as he emerged from his sleeping area, her hands pausing in their work. "Don't stop on my account," he said, running fingers through his sleep-tangled hair. "I've been meaning to sort that bin for months." Lyra resumed her task, but something was different. There was a subtle alertness to her movements, a consciousness of being observed that hadn't been present before. The perfect, machine-like obedience was showing hairline fractures. Kalen programmed breakfast for them both, watching surreptitiously as she worked. The Xylosion's organizational system was intuitive, grouping similar components with a logic that matched his own preferences. Without being told, she had grasped his workshop's underlying order and was enhancing it rather than imposing her own system. "How long were you doing engineering work?" he asked as they ate. "Before." He gestured vaguely, uncomfortable with naming her current situation. Lyra's fingers moved in a quick sequence, counting, he realized. Then she held up 9 fingers, followed by a circular motion. 9 years. She nodded. And before that, her hands formed shapes in the air, creating the impression of structures, connections, expansive designs. "Architecture," he guessed. A slight head shake. She pointed to the stars visible through the small viewport, then back to her structural gestures. "Space construction? Station design?" Her eyes brightened marginally, the closest thing to enthusiasm he'd seen from her. Before he could ask more, the workshop door chimed. Lyra immediately withdrew to her corner, head lowered, becoming invisible by sheer force of will. The door slid open to reveal Tannen, a station maintenance worker Kalen had known for years, one of the few people he might cautiously label friend. "So it's true," Tannen said without preamble, dark eyes fixing on Lyra. "You've got a Xylosion." "I don't have anything," Kalen replied, irritation seeping into his voice. "Zorhesh dropped her here and won't take her back." Tannen let out a low whistle. Dangerous game, refusing a gift from Zor. He stepped fully into the workshop, the door closing behind him. Unlike most visitors, he kept his distance from Lyra, respecting her space. Word spreading fast. "Some folks are saying you've gone soft." Others are saying you're making some kind of political statement. I'm not making any statements. I'm trying to work. Sure. Tannen nodded, unconvinced. Just thought you should know. Zor's people have been asking questions. About your habits, your clients. Things a mining executive has no business caring about. Kalen frowned. Why? My guess. He expected you to either use her or refuse her outright. The middle ground you're occupying, that's unpredictable. And if there's one thing men like Zor hate, it's things they can't predict. Tannen glanced again at Lyra. Watch yourself, old friend. And her too. After Tannen left, the workshop felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing in. Kalen turned to Lyra, who had remained perfectly still throughout the exchange. Do you know why Zor really sent you here? He asked. The Xylosian's eyes met his briefly, then flicked away. She gave a small shrug, a gesture so human it startled him. It doesn't make sense, Kalen muttered, more to himself than to her. I'm nobody, a repair technician on a backwater station. Why go to the trouble? Lyra's fingers twitched at her sides, as if she wanted to speak in that hand language again, but was restraining herself. Instead, she moved to the workbench and picked up a precision laser welder, one of his more expensive tools. She pointed to it, then to herself, then made a sweeping gesture around the workshop. Value, Kalen interpreted. You're saying you're valuable like my tools? Thought occurred to him, or that your skills are valuable in this environment? She nodded, then pointed to the collar at her neck, then to her head, tapping her temple. Your knowledge. They want what's in your head. Another realization dawned. You're not just a technician, are you? What did you work on before you were captured? Lyra's expression changed, fear mingling with longing. For a moment, Kalen thought she might actually speak, but instead, she picked up a stylus and a scrap of drafting film. Her extra-jointed fingers moved with extraordinary precision, sketching rapidly. What emerged on the film took Kalen's breath away, a schematic for a propulsion system unlike anything he'd seen before. The design principles were familiar, but the configuration was revolutionary, suggesting efficiencies that should have been theoretically impossible. You designed this, he whispered, not a question. Lyra nodded, her silver eyes holding his for the first time, unwavering. Then, with deliberate movements, she took the film and fed it into the molecular recycler, erasing all evidence of the design. The message was clear. This knowledge was dangerous. Dangerous enough to make her a target. Dangerous enough for Zor Hesh to gift her to an isolated engineer who might extract that knowledge, given the right incentives. Kalen felt something shift inside him. A protective instinct he'd thought long dead after years of carefully constructed isolation. I won't let them use you, he said quietly. Either of us. A week passed then too. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a routine developed. Mornings began with shared breakfast, followed by work side by side at the bench. Kalen found himself assigning Lyra increasingly complex tasks, all of which she completed with an efficiency and creativity that continually surprised him. They developed a wordless communication. A gesture here, a nod there, tools passed before they were asked for. The collar remained a constant reminder of her captivity, but what happened within the workshop walls began to feel like something else entirely. A partnership tenuous but growing. Lyra still rarely spoke aloud, seeming to prefer the hand language she'd created to compensate for her enforced silence. But occasionally, when they were alone and deeply focused on some challenging repair, single words would emerge. Adjust. Higher. There. Each utterance seemed to cost her, as if breaking through layers of conditioning and fear. Kalen never commented on these moments, sensing that drawing attention might cause her to retreat back into silence. Instead, he created space for her to exist more fully. He cleared out a storage closet, installing a small cot and privacy screen to replace the makeshift sleeping area in the main workshop. He ordered extra rations, studying which food she preferred and adjusting their meals accordingly. When he noticed her gazing longingly at his technical manuals, he began leaving them open on her workstation. Small acts of recognition, of humanity. The outside world, however, remained unchanged. Customers continued their knowing looks and inappropriate comments, though less frequently, as it became clear Kalen wouldn't engage. Rumors circulated throughout the station. Some said he was using the aliens' technical knowledge for some secret project. Others suggested more intimate arrangements. Kalen ignored them all until the sabotage began. It started small, a power fluctuation that reset his equipment mid-repair. Then a shipment of parts that arrived damaged beyond use. A client who abruptly canceled a lucrative contract with no explanation. "It's Zor," Tannen confirmed during one of his increasingly frequent visits. "He's putting pressure on you. The question is why?" Kalen glanced at Lyra, who was calibrating a scanner across the workshop, pretending not to listen. "I think I know why." That night, after they had finished the day's work and eaten their evening meal, Kalen broke the comfortable silence that usually accompanied their evenings. "Would it help if I asked you directly about your designs?" Lyra looked up sharply from the technical manual she'd been studying. Her eyes searched his face, wary and calculating. "Not for me," he clarified quickly. "Not to use, but to understand what we're dealing with. Weiser won't let this go." She set the manual aside, her posture straightening. For a long moment, she seemed to be weighing something in her mind. Then, with deliberate movements, she reached up to her collar. Kalen tensed. "Don't. It might." But Lyra wasn't trying to remove the collar. Instead, her long fingers probed a specific section, pressing in a complex sequence. A small panel slid open, revealing a tiny interface. "What are you doing?" he asked, alarmed. Lyra's voice, when it came, was raspy from disuse but surprisingly melodic. "Temporary override. Privacy mode." Her accent was strange, certain consonants elongated. Vowels pitched in unusual ways. "Limited duration. 10 minutes only." She took a deep breath, as if testing the feeling of speaking freely. "The collar monitors. Records. Transmits." Her sentences were clipped, efficient. "This creates brief gap in surveillance. Emergency function for medical needs." Kalen stared at her, stunned by the transformation. Gone was the submissive posture, the downcast eyes. In their place was a being of fierce intelligence and barely contained intensity. "My people," she continued, the words coming faster now, "were developing new form of faster-than-light travel. Clean, efficient, would have made current systems obsolete." Her silver eyes flashed. "Would have made mining operations like Zor's unnecessary. No need for asteroid fuel extraction if ships could power themselves using the technology." Understanding dawned. "So they attacked your colony to steal the research." Lyra nodded grimly. "But failed. Research was distributed. Each key engineer knew only part. I was lead architect on propulsion matrix." She tapped her temple. "My section here. Useless without the rest. But Zord doesn't know that. He thinks you have the complete design. Yes. Expected you to extract it, willingly or not." A bitter smile crossed her features. "When you refused to use me as anticipated, he became concerned. And now he's pressuring me, hoping I'll give up and return you to him." Kalen ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Or worse, they'll start trying to get the information myself." Lyra's expression darkened. "Has happened before. Previous owners tried. When they failed." She didn't finish the thought, but her meaning was clear. "How many?" Kalen asked quietly. "3 before you." The implications of that simple statement hung heavy in the air. 3 previous owners. 3 failed attempts to extract her knowledge. 3 likely deaths disguised as accidents or disappearances. "Why tell me this now?" he asked. Lyra's eyes met his, steady and determined. "Because you didn't try. Because you—" She hesitated, searching for words. "Saw me. Not alien. Not slave. Me." She pointed to the collar interface. "I'm almost up. But needed you to understand risk. For both." As she finished speaking, the small panel on her collar slid shut with an audible click. Immediately, her posture changed, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes lowered. The protective camouflage she'd worn since arriving. But something had fundamentally changed. The trust between them, tentative and fragile, had solidified into something more concrete. They were no longer reluctant roommates, but allies against a common threat. That night, as Kalen lay on his cot staring at the shadowed ceiling, he found himself planning. Something he hadn't done in years, not since he'd fled his former life for the anonymity of Series 7. Plans meant future, future meant connection, and connection meant vulnerability. Yet here he was, mind racing with possibilities, contingencies, escape routes. Because somehow, without intending it, he'd found something worth the risk. The sabotage escalated in the days that followed. A client reported that their repaired equipment had failed catastrophically, nearly causing a decompression event, though Kalen knew his work had been flawless. Station security conducted a routine inspection of his workshop, focusing suspicious attention on Lyra's presence. His supply requests were delayed or denied without explanation. He and Lyra worked longer hours, racing to complete jobs before the next obstacle arose. They spoke little during these days, conserving energy for the work, but their coordination became almost supernatural, anticipating each other's needs, compensating for each other's limitations, creating a seamless workflow that accomplished more than either could alone. When an important client's life support regulator failed right before a long-haul transport, they worked through the night to repair it, falling asleep at the workbench side by side, only to wake hours later with Lyra's head resting against Kalen's shoulder. Neither mentioned it afterward, but something had shifted yet again. It was mid-morning the following day when the power to the entire workshop cut out abruptly. Emergency lighting cast eerie blue shadows across the tools and half-completed projects. "That's not a station issue," Kalen muttered, checking the junction box. "That's our supply line specifically." Lyra moved to stand beside him, her hand briefly touching his arm, a gesture of solidarity that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. The workshop door slid open manually, pushed from the outside. Zor Hesh stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 security guards, their weapons drawn. "Kalen, my friend," the mining magnate said smoothly. "We need to talk." Kalen stepped forward, positioning himself between Zor and Lyra. "Nothing to talk about. Restore my power, and we'll forget this happened." Zor laughed, the sound entirely without humor. "Always so direct. One of your more charming qualities." He stepped inside, his guards fanning out behind him. "But I'm afraid the time for pretense is over. The Xylosian comes with me now." "She has a name," Kalen said coldly, "and she's not going anywhere." "Oh." Zor raised an eyebrow. "And who's going to stop me?" "You? An engineer who hasn't left this workshop in months." He gestured to his armed entourage. "Be reasonable, Kalen. This doesn't have to end badly." Kalen felt Lyra shift behind him, sensed rather than saw her slide toward the workbench. "What's your plan here, Zor? Shoot me in my own workshop?" The station administrator might have questions. Zor vavit dismissive. Tragic accident during an equipment malfunction. These old modules, so unreliable, particularly when their power systems are compromised. He smiled coldly. The administrator will read the report and move on. No one asks too many questions on Series 7. You, of all people, should appreciate that. And Lyra will fulfill her original purpose. After appropriate reconditioning, of course. Zor's eyes hardened. She seems to have developed some unfortunate habits under your care. One of the guards moved forward, reaching for Lyra. Kalen stepped into his path, blocking access. "Last warning," Zor said quietly. "Stanta Zida." Kalen didn't move. "No." The guard raised his weapon, pointing it at Kalen's chest. "On the count of 3, Zor continued. 1, 2. The sound of a high-pitched whine cut through the tension. Everyone turned to see Lyra holding Kalen's modified phase disruptor, a tool designed for separating fuse components, but easily repurposed as a weapon. "Step back," she said clearly, her voice strong despite weeks of minimal speech. The disruptor was aimed directly at Zor Hesh. The mining magnate's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in calculation. "You won't use that," he said. "The collar will." "The collar," Lyra interrupted, "has been modified." With her free hand, she touched the control panel, which slid open at her command. "Your surveillance has been receiving a loop for weeks. Your control functions have been isolated." It was a bluff. Kalen knew it. They discussed the collar's functions during their brief private conversations, and while they made progress understanding it, they hadn't been able to override its core systems. But the conviction in Lyra's voice, the steady hand holding the disruptor, even he almost believed her. Zor, however, wasn't convinced. "Shoot them both," he ordered his guards. Everything happened at once. The guards raised their weapons. Kalen lunged for the workbench, grabbing a heavy wrench. Lyra fired the disruptor, not at Zor or the guards, but the ceiling junction where the main oxygen line fed into the workshop. With a screech of tearing metal, the line ruptured, releasing a pressurized blast of air that sent tools, components, and people flying. Warning klaxons blared as the emergency containment system detected the breach. Kalen seized the moment of confusion to tackle the nearest guard, wrestling his weapon away. Across the room, Lyra had done the same, using her extraordinary reflexes to disarm another guard before he could recover. "Seal the breach," Zor shouted over the alarm, picking himself up from where he'd been thrown against the storage unit. But it was too late. The station's automated systems had detected the oxygen loss and triggered emergency protocols. Blast doors throughout the adjacent sections were sealing, and evacuation alerts echoed through the corridors. Lyra moved to Kalen's side, both of them now armed with confiscated weapons. The remaining guards hesitated, weighing their options as the oxygen level in the workshop continued to drop. "Stand down," Kalen commanded, his weapon trained on Zor. "Take your men and leave while you still can." Zor's face contorted with rage. "You think this changes anything? There's nowhere on this station you can hide. You've just sealed your fate." "Not the station," Kalen replied. "We're leaving." Understanding dawned on Zor's face. "The hangar bay is locked down during emergencies. You'll never—" "Maintenance hatches aren't," Lyra interrupted. "Auxiliary transport docks remain operational for emergency responders." Zor lunged forward, reaching for the control panel on his wrist. "Override emergency." Lyra fired, a precise shot that shattered the panel, sending electronic sparks dancing across Zor's expensive suit. The mining magnate howled in pain, clutching his wrist. "That was for my people," she said quietly. The workshop's emergency lighting flickered as the station's systems rerouted power to contain the breach. In the strobing red glow, Kalen and Lyra backed toward the rear maintenance hatch, their planned escape route, prepared days ago when they first suspected Zor might take direct action. "This isn't over," Zor snarled through gritted teeth. "The collar's tracking function is independent. Wherever you go." "About that," Kalen said, allowing himself a grim smile. He pulled a small device from his pocket, one he and Lyra had assembled in secret, working late into the nights. With a gesture to Lyra, who tilted her head to expose the collar's main interface, he pressed the device against it. There was a spark, a brief high-pitched whine, and the collar's lights went dark. It didn't fall off. They hadn't managed that breakthrough yet, but its core functions were fried. Zor's eyes widened in disbelief. "Ow! Should have paid more attention to what I was actually repairing for you all these years," Kalen said, "including your security systems." The emergency klaxons intensified as the station's AI detected the escalating situation. "Warning! Security breach in Sector 7G. All personnel evacuate immediately. Emergency response teams en route." It was time to go. Kalen hit the control for the maintenance hatch. As it slid open, he used the butt of his weapon to smash the manual override, ensuring it couldn't be sealed remotely. "Touch him and I fire," Lyra warned the guards, who had been inching closer during the exchange. To emphasize her point, she adjusted her weapon's setting to maximum, the distinctive whine making the guards freeze. Backing into the maintenance tunnel, Kalen and Lyra slipped away just as the emergency response alarm reached its crescendo. The last thing they saw was Zor Hesh's face, contorted with fury and promise of retribution. The maintenance tunnels of Series 7 were a maze of cramped passages, exposed conduits, and jury-rigged repairs, the unglamorous skeleton that kept the mining outpost functioning. Most station personnel avoided them entirely, relying instead on the main corridors and automated transport tubes. But Kalen, who had spent years fixing the station's forgotten infrastructure, knew them intimately. 3 levels down, then across to Auxiliary Bay 4, he whispered as they navigated the dim passages. "The maintenance shuttle there is prepped." Lyra nodded, her silver eyes reflecting what little light existed in the tunnel. She moved with natural grace through the confined space, her slender form an advantage in the narrow passages. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed distantly, shouted orders, the clang of security personnel accessing the tunnel network. "They're mobilizing fast," she observed. "Zor has the station administrator in his pocket," Kalen replied grimly. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they lock down every exit." They reached a junction where multiple tunnels converged. Kalen hesitated, trying to recall the least used path. "This way," Lyra said with surprising confidence, pointing to a descending passage on the right. When he gave her a questioning look, she added, "Station schematics were in your technical database. I memorized them." Of course she had. Kalen felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in years. Admiration, certainly, but also a warmth that went beyond respect for her abilities. They descended rapidly, bypassing the normal access points in favor of emergency maintenance hatches that would trigger fewer alerts. The air grew noticeably cooler as they approached the station's outer ring, where the auxiliary bays were located. "Almost there," Kalen murmured as they reached the final junction. "Auxiliary Bay 4 is just beyond this section. The shuttle isn't much, just a short-range maintenance vessel, but it'll get us to the transport nexus at Europa Station." Lyra touched his arm, halting him, her head tilted, listening. Someone's ahead. Kalen strained his ears, but heard nothing. Still, he learned to trust Lyra's enhanced senses. They pressed themselves against the tunnel wall, weapons ready. Footsteps approached, accompanied by the crackle of a security comm. "Negative on Section 42B. Proceeding to the auxiliary bay checkpoints." "Over." Kalen exchanged a glance with Lyra. Their planned route was being secured. They needed an alternative, fast. "There's another way," he whispered, "but it's risky. The external maintenance crawlway." Lyra's eyes widened slightly. The external crawlways were essentially narrow tunnels along the station's hull, protected from vacuum by nothing more than a single pressure door at each end. If anything went wrong, a micrometeorite impact, a seal failure, they'd be exposed to the vacuum of space within seconds. "Lead on," she said simply. They backtracked to a junction they'd passed earlier, then took a rarely used branch that led to the station's outermost layer. At the end of the passage was a heavy pressure door with warning symbols emblazoned across it in multiple languages. Kalen entered his engineering override code. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the console beeped acceptance, and the door began its laborious unlocking sequence. "They'll detect this," Lyra warned. "I know. We'll have to move fast." The door finally opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Beyond lay a transparent tube, barely large enough for a person to crawl through, curved along the station's hull. Through its walls, the endless void of space was visible, punctuated by the distant lights of stars and the brooding mass of Ceres itself looming above. Without hesitation, Lyra entered first, her slender form slipping easily into the confined space. Kalen followed, sealing the pressure door behind them. The crawlway was cold, their breath immediately fogging in the minimally heated air. "Auxiliary Bay 4 is 50 meters around the curve," Kalen said, his voice sounding strange in the acoustically isolated tube. "There's an emergency access that bypasses the main bay door." They began crawling, acutely aware of the vacuum just centimeters away behind the transparent material. The view was both terrifying and mesmerizing, the infinite blackness contrasting with the illuminated segments of Ceres 7 spreading out below them. They had covered perhaps half the distance when alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights activated along the hull, bathing the crawlway in pulsing red illumination. "Full lockdown initiated," announced the station's AI, its voice tinny through the external speakers. "All personnel report to secure locations." This is not a drill. "They found us," Kalen said grimly. "We need to—" A violent shudder ran through the station, cutting him off. The crawlway lurched, sliding several centimeters along its mounting brackets. Something had impacted the station or been detonated deliberately. Lyra met his eyes, understanding passing between them without words. Zur was beyond caring about station protocols or collateral damage now. He was willing to risk structural damage to the station itself rather than let them escape. "Move," Kalen urged, pushing forward as fast as the confined space would allow. They reached the emergency access hatch just as another impact rocked the station. This one was closer, the shock wave causing a hairline crack to form in the crawlway's transparent material. A soft whistling sound indicated the beginning of a pressure leak. Kalen frantically input his override code into the access hatch. Nothing happened. "They've locked out your credentials," Lyra observed, her voice impossibly calm given the circumstances. "Then we do this the hard way." Kalen pulled a small tool from his pocket, a universal bypass device he'd created years ago for particularly stubborn machinery. He'd never imagined using it to save his own life. The crack in the crawlway was spreading, the whistling growing louder as precious air escaped into the vacuum. They had perhaps minutes before catastrophic failure. Kalen's fingers worked furiously, connecting the bypass device to the hatch's control panel, rerouting security protocols. Beside him, Lyra braced herself against the crawlway's walls, using her body to relieve pressure on the damaged section. With a triumphant beep, the hatch's indicators changed from red to green. The door slid open, revealing the dimly lit interior of Auxiliary Bay 4. They tumbled through, Kalen slamming his hand on the emergency seal button. The hatch closed just as the crawlway's integrity failed completely, the structure tearing away from the station in a silent explosion visible through the bay's viewport. For a moment, they lay on the floor, gasping in the relatively abundant air of the Auxiliary Bay. Then reality reasserted itself. They were still far from safe. The bay contained a single maintenance shuttle, a boxy, utilitarian vessel designed for hull repairs and short-range transportation. It wasn't pretty, but it was their only hope. "Can you pilot it?" Kalen asked as they scrambled to their feet. Lyra was already moving toward the shuttle's access ramp. "I designed vessels that cross star systems," she replied with the faintest hint of pride. "I can manage this." The shuttle's systems came online as they strapped themselves into the cockpit. Outside in the bay, alarm lights continued their frantic flashing. The main bay doors remained sealed, standard lockdown procedure. "The doors won't open while we're in lockdown," Kalen said, checking the shuttle systems. "We're trapped." Lyra's hands danced across the control interface. "Not necessarily." She pointed to a maintenance panel near the bay's emergency systems. "The docking clamps have a manual release. If we can disengage while firing the shuttle's maneuvering thrusters at full power, we might generate enough force to break through the doors," Kalen finished, seeing her plan. "But the structural stress could tear the shuttle apart." "Do you have a better suggestion?" she asked, her silver eyes meeting his. He didn't. And beyond those bay doors lay something neither of them had dared hope for in a very long time. Freedom. "Let's do it," he said, reaching for the shuttle's engine startup sequence. A pounding at the bay's interior door interrupted them. Security forces had arrived. "Initiating emergency launch sequence," Lyra announced, her fingers flying across the controls. "Bypass safety protocols. Reroute all power to forward thrusters." The shuttle's engines whined as they powered up far beyond their rated capacity. Warning messages flashed across the console, which Lyra systematically overrode. Outside, the pounding intensified, accompanied by the hiss of cutting tools being applied to the door. "Docking clamps," Kalen asked tensely. "On my mark." Lyra's eyes were fixed on the power readings, waiting for the perfect moment when the thrusters reached maximum capacity, but before they triggered a catastrophic overload. The interior door began to glow red-hot as the cutting tools broke through its outer layer. "Now!" Lyra shouted. Kalen slammed his hand down on the manual release. The docking clamps disengaged with a metallic clang that resonated throughout the small vessel. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. The shuttle strained against the bay doors, engines screaming in protest, structure creaking under forces it was never designed to withstand. Then, with a shriek of tearing metal, the bay doors buckled outward. The vacuum of space reached in like a hungry predator, grabbing anything not secured and pulling it violently outward. The shuttle shot forward, propelled by both its straining engines and the explosive decompression of the bay. They were free. Behind them, Series 7 receded rapidly, its irregular form outlined against the darkness of space. Ahead lay nothing but stars and the distant promise of Europa Station, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. The shuttle's systems stabilized as Lyra brought the overloaded engines back to sustainable levels. Emergency alarms quieted, leaving the cockpit in a strange, almost peaceful silence. "They'll send pursuit vessels," Kalen said after a moment, checking the rudimentary sensor array. "Yes," Lyra agreed, "but we have a head start, and this route passes through a dense section of the asteroid belt. With proper navigation, we can lose them among the larger bodies." As if to punctuate her words, she executed a series of precise maneuvers, slipping the shuttle behind a tumbling asteroid and changing course in a way that would confuse pursuing sensors. Kalen watched her work with growing admiration. The transformation was remarkable. The silent, submissive figure he'd first encountered was gone, replaced by this confident, supremely capable being. And yet, he realized, she had always been this person, hidden beneath layers of enforced compliance and fear. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something dangerous: hope. Hours passed as they navigated the treacherous asteroid field. True to Lyra's prediction, 2 security vessels had been dispatched from Series 7, but her evasive maneuvers proved effective. After a tense game of hide-and-seek among the tumbling space rocks, their pursuers' engine signatures faded from the sensors, presumably returning to the station. The immediate danger past, they had a moment to truly assess their situation. The shuttle was functioning, but had sustained damage during their dramatic exit. Life support systems were stable, but fuel reserves were concerning. They had perhaps enough for another 24 hours of flight at current speeds. Europa Station is 30 hours away at maximum sustainable thrust, Lyra reported after running the calculations. "We won't make it without conserving power." Kayla nodded, mentally reviewing their limited options. "We can shut down non-essential systems, divert everything to propulsion and minimal life support. That would give us perhaps 28 hours of flight time," Lyra agreed. Still not enough. They both knew what remained unsaid. In the vast emptiness between Ceres and Europa, a mere 2-hour shortfall might as well be an eternity. "There's another possibility," Kalen said slowly, pulling up the shuttle's navigational database. "A mining outpost on one of the outer fragments. Abandoned years ago when the ore quality dropped, but it might still have functional docking facilities. And maybe emergency supplies." Lyra studied the coordinates. "It's a detour, but within range. If we can refuel there, or at least send a distress signal to a passing transport," Kalen added. "It's better than drifting powerless in the belt." Decision made, they adjusted course. The abandoned outpost was 6 hours away at their current speed, an achievable goal that would still leave them with reserves for the next leg of their journey. As the shuttle found its new heading, a strange quiet settled over the cockpit. For the first time since they'd met, they were truly alone. No surveillance, no pretense, no immediate crisis demanding action. Just 2 beings in a small vessel, surrounded by the endless vacuum of space. Lyra was the first to break the silence. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me." Kalen met her gaze, understanding all that those few words encompassed. "I think you saw me too," he replied softly, when no one else bothered to look. Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition, a connection forged not despite their differences, but because of all they'd endured together. "What happens if we make it?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Beyond Europa Station, I mean." It was a question Kalen had been avoiding since they'd first conceived their escape plan. The future was a luxury he hadn't allowed himself to consider for years. "I have contacts in the outer colonies," he said. "People who don't ask questions. We could disappear there, at least for a while." He hesitated, then added, "That is, if you wanted to stay together." "I wouldn't assume." "I would," Lyra interrupted, her silver eyes holding his with an intensity that left no doubt about her meaning. "Stay with you, I mean." Kalen felt something in his chest tighten, a knot of emotion he'd long since buried breaking free. "We could find a quiet place. A repair shop, maybe, somewhere we could use our skills without drawing attention. It wouldn't be luxurious, but it would be ours," Lyra finished. "Our workshop. Our home." Home. The word hung between them, precious and fragile as a soap bubble. "Yes," Kalen said. "Our home." They remained in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the shuttle continued its journey through the asteroid belt. Occasionally, one would make a small adjustment to their course or check a system reading, but mostly they simply existed together in the shared space, their presence a comfort to each other. The abandoned mining outpost appeared on their sensors several hours later, a jagged structure built into and around a medium-sized asteroid. Its exterior lights were dark, its docking beacons inactive, but the basic structure appeared intact. "No power signatures," Lyra observed, scanning the facility. "Complete shutdown." Kalen expected as much. "We'll have to dock manually and use the shuttle systems to attempt reactivation of the outpost's emergency power." The docking procedure was tense, requiring both their skills. Without guidance systems or automated clamps, they had to perfectly align the shuttle with the outpost's external airlock using only maneuvering thrusters and visual confirmation. After 3 nerve-wracking attempts, they achieved a solid connection, the airlock seals engaging with a satisfying thunk that reverberated through the hull. "Pressure equalization looks good," Kalen reported, checking the readings. "The outpost environment is holding. Atmosphere is thin but breathable." They gathered the shuttle's limited emergency supplies, a small medkit, a pair of flashlights, and their confiscated weapons, before cycling through the airlock into the abandoned facility. The outpost's interior was a ghostly scene, illuminated only by their flashlights and the occasional emergency indicator that still drew power from backup cells. Dust floated in the microgravity, undisturbed for years until their arrival. The walls bore the logo of a long-defunct mining corporation, faded and peeling in places. "Main power controls should be on the operations deck," Kalen said, orienting himself using the standard layout of these facilities. 2 levels up, central module. They moved carefully through the silent corridors, their flashlights casting long shadows that seemed to follow them like restless spirits. The absence of sound was profound. No humming of environmental systems, no distant conversations, none of the constant background noise that characterized living stations. Just the sound of their breathing and the occasional creak of the structure as it rotated slowly in the asteroid's weak gravitational field. The operations deck was exactly where Kalen had predicted, a circular room dominated by darkened control consoles and monitor arrays. At the center stood the master control unit, its emergency battery indicator showing a faint red glow, nearly depleted, but not quite dead. "Let's see if we can wake this place up," Kalen murmured, setting to work on the control panel while Lyra explored the surrounding stations. After several minutes of bypassing security protocols and rerouting power pathways, Kalen managed to activate the outpost's emergency systems. Lights flickered on at minimal intensity, and the soft hum of air circulation units activating filled the silence. It wasn't much, but it was a vast improvement over the tomb-like conditions they'd entered. "I found something," Lyra called from secondary console. "Supply inventory. According to this, there should be emergency fuel cells in the maintenance bay, compatible with our shuttle class." "That's our first priority then," Kalen agreed. "But first, let's see if we can." A sudden alert from the console interrupted him. A proximity warning, indicating an approaching vessel. "I thought you said we lost them," Lyra said, moving quickly to his side. "We did," Kalen's fingers flew across the console, bringing up the rudimentary sensor display. This is coming from the opposite direction, not from Ceres. They watched in tense silence as the vessel's signature resolved on the screen. It was larger than their shuttle, its approach vector suggesting a deliberate course to the abandoned outpost. Could be salvagers, Kalen suggested, or miners looking for unclaimed equipment, or Zor hedging his bets, monitoring all potential stopover points, Lyra countered grimly. The vessel's identification code finally appeared on the screen. Not a mining security ship, but not a simple transport either. Its designation indicated a private vessel, registered to an independent operator. They'll have detected our power activation, Kalen said. No way to hide our presence now. So we prepare for either outcome, Lyra decided, checking the charge on her weapon. Potential allies or another threat. They worked quickly, gathering the emergency fuel cells from the maintenance bay and transferring them to their shuttle. If the approaching vessel proved hostile, they needed to be ready to depart immediately. The outpost's external cameras activated just in time to show the unknown ship docking at an adjacent airlock. It was a sleek vessel, clearly well-maintained, with modifications suggesting it was designed for speed and maneuverability rather than cargo capacity. Smuggler, maybe, Kalen suggested, watching the airlock cycle on the monitor. Or bounty hunter. Either way, they'll be armed, Lyra noted. They positioned themselves with clear sight lines to the corridor leading from the second airlock, weapons ready, but not immediately visible. No sense starting a confrontation if none was necessary. The inner door slid open, and a figure stepped through, a tall woman in a customized environment suit, her dark hair pulled back in intricate braids, a holstered weapon visible at her hip. Behind her came two more individuals, a broad-shouldered man with cybernetic enhancements visible along his jawline, and a slender, non-human figure whose species Kalen didn't immediately recognize. The woman raised her hand slowly, showing them empty. "Easy," she called out. "We're not looking for trouble." "What are you looking for?" Kalen responded, remaining partially concealed behind a structural support. "Originally? Salvage." The woman's eyes scanned the room, stopping when she spotted Lyra's distinctive blue form. Recognition flashed across her features. "But now I'm thinking we found something more interesting. A Xylosian, far from home." Lyra tensed beside Kalen, her finger tightening on her weapon. The woman noticed the reaction and quickly added, "We're not with Zorhesh or any other corporate interest." "Quite the opposite." "Then who are you?" Kalen demanded. "Captain Mira Kell, of the independent vessel Horizon's Edge." The woman took a careful step forward. "We're part of the Free Transit Network." Kalen and Lyra exchanged glances. The Free Transit Network was a loose alliance of ships and crews who operated in the gray areas of space law. Smugglers, yes, but also resistance fighters who opposed corporate exploitation of outer colonies and outposts. They were known for assisting refugees and transporting people who needed to disappear. "If you're running from Zorhesh," Captain Kell continued, "you've made a powerful enemy. And if you've helped a Xylosian escape servitude, you made an even more dangerous one in the corporate alliance." "What's your point?" Kalen asked cautiously. "My point," Kell replied with a faint smile, "is that we might be able to help each other. My ship is faster than anything Ceres Station can deploy, with range to reach the outer colonies without stopping. And we happen to have a contact at Europa Station who specializes in certain modifications." She gestured towards Lyra's collar, "including deactivating control devices permanently." Lyra stepped forward, revealing herself fully. "How do we know we can trust you?" Captain Kell regarded her thoughtfully. "You don't. But consider this. If we wanted to capture you, we'd have brought more firepower and fewer words. And if we wanted to sell you out to Zorhesh, we'd have already sent him your location." It was a fair point, and their options were limited. "What would you want in exchange?" Kalen asked. "Information," Kell replied promptly. "Whatever you can tell us about Ceres Station security protocols, Zor's operations, anything that might help others in similar situations to yours." "And after Europa Station?" Lyra pressed. "That's up to you. We could drop you at any port you choose, no questions asked." "Or," Kell hesitated, then continued, "We always have room for skilled engineers on the edge, especially ones with innovation experience. But that would be your decision, made freely." Kaylin looked at Lyra, searching her face for her thoughts. They had planned to strike out on their own, to build that quiet life they'd spoken of. But perhaps there was another path, one where they could use their skills not just to survive, but to help others like them. "We need a moment to discuss," he told Kel. The captain nodded. "Take all the time you need. We'll wait by our ship." As the three visitors retreated to give them privacy, Kaylin and Lyra moved to the far side of the operations deck. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. Lyra's silver eyes were thoughtful. They could have attacked immediately. The fact that they didn't suggest their intentions might be genuine. She touched the now-deactivated collar at her neck, and the possibility of removing this completely. But joining their crew would mean risk, Kaylin pointed out. Constant movement, potential confrontations with corporate forces. "Yes," Lyra agreed, "but also purpose. A chance to use what we know to prevent others from experiencing what I did." She met his gaze directly. "What would you choose if the decision were yours alone?" Kaylin considered the question. After years of isolation, of deliberately avoiding connections and causes, the thought of joining a crew, a community, was both terrifying and strangely appealing. And the opportunity to strike back at the system that had enabled Zorhesh and others like him. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've spent too long hiding from the world. Maybe it's time to engage with it again." He took her hand, an unprecedented gesture between them, but one that felt right in this moment. "But whatever we decide together. That's non-negotiable." Lyra's fingers intertwined with his, her extra joint allowing her to wrap her hand around his in a way that felt uniquely intimate. "Together," she agreed, the word carrying all the weight of a vow. They approached Captain Kell and her crew, who had respected their request for privacy and remained by their vessel's airlock. "We have conditions," Kaylin stated firmly. Kell raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "First, we remain together at all times. Where one goes, the other follows." "Granted," Kell nodded. "That's standard practice for our refugees anyway." "Second," Lyra continued, "we make no final decision about joining your crew until after the collar is removed and we've reached Europa Station. We need time to consider our options without pressure." "Also acceptable," Kell agreed. "And third," Kaylin and Lyra exchanged a glance. "Third," Kaylin said, "is that no matter what happens next, we are recognized as free individuals making our own choices. Not assets, not resources, people." A smile spread across Captain Kell's face. Not the calculated expression of a negotiator, but something warmer and more genuine. "That's not just acceptable. It's fundamental to everything the network stands for. You have my word." And somehow, despite all the betrayals and disappointments of his past, Kaylin found himself believing her. As they prepared to transfer to the horizon's edge, Lyra paused on the threshold between the outpost and their new transport. She turned to Kaylin, silver eyes reflecting the starlight visible through the viewport. "Whatever happens next," she said softly, "thank you for refusing to use me that first day, for seeing a person when everyone else saw property." Kaylin took her hand once more, feeling the unique contours of her fingers against his own. "We made each other family," he replied. "Against all odds, against everyone's expectations. That's something no one can take from us now." Together, they stepped across the threshold, leaving behind the abandoned outpost and the isolated lives they had once known. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and challenge, but also possibility, purpose, and the family they had built between them, one conscious choice at a time. As the horizon's edge disengaged from the outpost and set course for Europa Station, Kaylin and Lyra stood at a viewport, watching the stars shift around them. Not master and slave, not owner and possession, but two beings who had chosen each other as family in a universe that had tried to deny them that most basic of rights. And in that choice, they had found something neither had dared hope for, a future unbounded in their own.